Hello, 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 hello.
Hey, oh man, you scared me. I like forgot that I was in the meeting and I just heard a voice. So, hey,
Hey, how's it going?
it's good. How are you doing?
It's going. It's
Yeah,
going today.
I feel very the same. It's been an interesting couple of weeks for me. And Q3 just started, so,
That's the one. That's the
Yep.
one. Between kicking off the release team and internal stuff, it's been fun.
Yeah. So for today, I'm just gonna pick up where I left off. We're not gonna talk about. There's like gonna be like a separate meeting, right, for the SIG scalability stuff.
Yeah, there's some chatter going on already on an issue, and I need to take some time to digest that.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll like if it comes up, I'll try to limit it, I guess, because we'll have a separate conversation.
Yeah, I think we would just make it clear that it's parking lot first and foremost, and if we happen to want
Yeah.
to chat about it a little bit more, we can.
Okay. Cool.
Ugh.
I'm trying to my screen like so I usually share my screen, but like I'm only on my laptop, so it's like difficult to see both.
Yeah, no problem. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
All right, where were we at?
We stopped right at what will we do differently? I think we got just through.
First three items, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we did go through the first three. It says part two starts here. Okay.
I was like, I knew I put a marker down somewhere.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So, did we put names in this? No, we didn't bother. All right. Ooh, looks like it is on the schedule.
I can write my last name. It's difficult.
Oh yeah, I've got it. I just didn't see you put it up anywhere often, so
Yeah. I try to just because it's so unique. I like. I try to limit where I like publish my name. Just one search away, you know. The only person with my name that exists. So.
All right, so we've got 7 here. Give it a few more minutes for people to peel in. Does Zoom chat pop up the pre-chat if you're not already here? Anyhow, what I meant to say was there is the retro doc, the meeting link, and the agenda in Zoom chat. So if you have not popped onto that already, please do. Please drop your name in and let us know that you're here.
It's about 9 people so far. Stephen, for like the action items, does it usually just live in the doc or does it go somewhere else after?
We're a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think that
Depending on
I,
what it is.
yeah, some of the action items will end up as issues. You can see, I think that some of them already are.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Should we get started?
yeah, why not?
Okay. So just picking up where should we start off with doesn't someone usually introduce?
Yeah, we'll do the standard Kubernetes SIG meeting doodad. Hello, everyone. This is the SIG release meeting for July 2nd, 2019. This is a recorded meeting that is on the internet, that will be on the internet. So please be mindful of what you say. Please be sure to be good to everyone and adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. This will be the second part of the Kubernetes 115 retro. We're going to kick off the meeting with that. Christine will be facilitating. So I will let you take it away, Christine.
All right. So picking up where we left off last time, we were going through what will we do differently in the 116 release. So I believe Josh, if you're here.
So Josh mentioned that he would be about 10 minutes late to this.
Got it. So maybe we can move on to the next one and wait till he arrives.
Yeah.
So the next one, I'm still learning the handle names, so I think Jeffrey.
Yeah, that's Jeff Sika.
Yeah. Want to read this one? Oh, he said that I'm on a phone call at the same time. Okay. The changelog portion of the release notes will exclusively reside in the release notes website.
So we mentioned, I think we mentioned that. I believe that Tim maybe had questions on that, feeling that there were some things that should remain in the repo, because that's the standard way of doing things. So I don't have strong opinions. I like the website. I think that the website is great. I don't have strong opinions on where the rel notes live. I know rather the stuff that we've done to trim the change log is good. We should continue doing some of that. But so I think that Tim might have had some comments about it. I don't know what they are though, and Tim is also on vacation. So Fleur.
Did I miss changelog time?
That we're talking about it right now. So go for it.
Yeah, so long story short, we are now going to take all of the changelog entries in the markdown and we are going to only publish them on the release note site, which I imagine you already just said, so I'm repeating myself.
Cool.
So in terms of changes to tooling, what would we have to do? What would we have to not do? There are some tools that are kind of like intermingled with the release notes right now, right?
Yeah, so there's kind of two components to this. One is the website itself, and the other is the JSON generator, which also is the markdown generator. The plan is over the next release, we're going to take out the bash markdown generator and replace it with the Golang generator. And then that way, whenever people, run Anago or whatever it is, and then actually generate a release, it'll automatically generate the JSON and then essentially cut a PR against the website to update the JSON that is used.
Got
That
it.
makes sense?
Cool. So I know that there were also, I don't see Sasha on the call, but I know there was some work around doing, adding additional bits to the templates. So like docs bits.
Yes, one of the things that he is trying to do right now is make it so every entry could potentially link to both relevant documentation as well as a relevant KEP. I think that's kind of getting hashed out with the GitHub team because it is a change to the PR template.
Yeah. I think my only comment there would be like, I think it said like relevant kep, and I think that it would be obvious that it's relevant if it's in the template. So maybe just kep and link or doc or something could be the array instead, or the set of lists.
Yeah.
But yeah, I should comment that on the PR. So I'll do that.
You do you.
Okay, cool. So next one, unless Josh has joined.
So Josh is not here yet, but I guess I can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the next one. Okay.
Yeah. So what we kind of want to do here is so there are quite a few dependencies that Kubernetes has, and every time we get around to the point where we're like, hey, we have to bump a dependency, the requirement becomes like, hey, I have to go find all of the places in the code where I put that thing and make sure it gets bumped and make sure the tests pass, or I didn't miss this thing, or I didn't push this thing, or I forgot to push this thing, or tell that person that they had to cut this release so I could do that. So they're kind of like, there are a few things at play trying to bump a dependency in Kubernetes. So what we were thinking, and I think there is already a PR in flight for that, is like defining a dependencies list, a third-party dependencies list, right?
Mm-hmm.
So understanding the version of etcd and CNI and CRI tools and things like that. And let me give me a second, just find the link. I know it's in the channel. So that is here. And there's already some active discussion. Yassine has put up the PR for that. Dims has commented, I believe. And Tim Pepper is interested. I know that's something that we, I think that it's something that, downstream dependence of Kubernetes as well will benefit from being able to at a glance know, like if I'm consuming Kubernetes on a fork or something like that, and I need to bump blah, right? I know how to do it, right? If I'm pushing PRs for blah, I know how to do it very quickly. I know myself, I ran into trying to uncover the bits around how we package Kubernetes CNI. Right, so that's like the CNI tool. So we're at like, I think the last few we did were like 060, 061, 075. 081 is the most recent one. So I have issued PRs for that in Kubernetes release, as well as Kubernetes. The tricky thing about it is like, one has to land at a certain time before this thing happens, and then like if you don't do that, then the tests will fail. So I'm discovering that we have no idea how we release certain things, right? And Kubernetes CNI is one of them. So having a dependencies list ahead of time, knowing exactly where to go, where to bump these versions and tweak things would be super helpful to, I think, everyone who consumes Kubernetes. So
yeah, for sure. Cool. And so you said this is already kind of in flight, and there's a PR and stuff.
Yeah, I linked the PR in the doc just now.
Cool. Sounds great. Any other thoughts on that? Okay. So the next one, I believe, how do you how do you pronounce your name? Sorry.
Lockie.
Okay. Sorry about that. So you have the next one.
That's okay. Yeah, so the interesting thing, if I'm not wearing my release team hat at the moment, but as somebody who worked on caps and had a particular feature enhancement come in for 115, what ended up happening in my experience was we signed off on the cap and everybody was okay with it. Then when we brought the implementation, there was a lot of bike shedding that was contradictory to the cap. So just an interesting observation when you're trying to land large changes to code, existing code, there's not a good split between actually showing up and writing the code as according to what was defined in the CAP, without getting into kind of that ultimate bike shedding. I think specifically I called out 2 different issues, which were comments on the PR that we put in that was as part of the work that was defined in the CAP, that were basically like, well, why don't we change this? And it's not that people shouldn't have the right to change their opinion, but it's hard when you agree on something like a CAP and then you kind of bike shed over it in comments on the PR. So we rocked up and did the CAP. We did the work as according to the CAP, but then when it was actually approved and the final thing, now I have to go and reconcile the CAP back with what we actually implemented, right? So there's kind of it was more just, how do we want CAPs to work? It was worth calling this out. I'm not sure if everybody can relate to this specific use case. I think this was a complex bit of work, so not everybody would have this. But I think the challenge that I got and what I wanted to bring back was that from the engineers that worked on this change, it was hard to understand. We had a moving target. And CAPS was specifically trying to define what it is that you're going to change. Then you bring that change, and basically you've already got agreement that this change will be accepted. But they were specific challenges. I just wanted to call that out. No specific action required, but I thought it was interesting just from a usability standpoint.
Yeah. So for things like to change in 1.16, maybe it might help to make CAPs a little bit smaller, because you had said that the CAP was pretty big, right? So that might help.
Well, I think that part of it is I'm not sure if it's a matter of size in particular. So I don't think it's a matter of size. I think it's a matter of like specificity, right? So if you have a very tightly defined CAP, right, then you just run in. If I say like phase 0 of this project is going to be 7 bullet points, right? I implement the 7 bullet points and be done with it, right? If I say in this CAP we're going to blah, right? And blah is a very fuzzy, loosely defined thing, then yes, that's going to open up people to bike shedding during the actual implementation, right? The point of the CAP is to try to lay down some of the idea of what the implementation is going to be ahead of time, right? And there are lots of other points to the CAP, but I think that a tightly defined CAP is more valuable than a loosely defined one. I think that trying to do everything at once is not great either, right? So I have I have this, large ominous project, and I'm going to write a CAP, and I'm going to try to define every detail for this thing, right? Like that's going to be hard to do, right? So I think, I think I know the one that Lockie is talking about in particular, because we've chatted about it. But it's one of the one of those things is, functionally changes some of the underpinnings of the different APIs that we use in the project, right? So like that's not just going to be something easy to do, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, what it was well defined, and in retrospect, people are going and they're like, oh, well, I realized that, well, now that we're touching this thing, what if we did blah, right? And I think that, if you have a well-defined CAP, you should feel free and feel empowered to say, like, here's what we defined, here's what we plan to do, right? This idea is a great idea, but let's take this as an action item, a follow-up PR or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's being more diligent about where your boundaries are in terms of what you're going to implement and when. That's.
Makes sense.
I'll stop yapping.
No, yeah, it makes sense. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, I see Josh has joined, and you had the first one from the start. We saved for you, so if you want to talk about that, the first one of the part 2 starts here.
Okay. Yeah. So this was a to-do thing, which is to make, so part of this is done and part of this is not done, which is to make sure that leads and shadows are clear in the idea that shadows are encouraged. That part of being a shadow is that you are supposed to attend meetings if your time zone allows you to. Maybe not all of them, but at least some of them. And that also in terms of delivering section reports for things like the burn down, the shadows and their lead are considered a team. So we had a number of burn downs where the lead was not available for that burn down, and they did not designate a shadow to deliver it in their place.
Got it.
The second half of this, which is not done yet, which is writing documentation for this, because there is nowhere in the documentation that says that you should do this. Hence, some people not knowing about it.
Yeah, makes sense.
So that is still a to-do item, which is on the list of SIG release issues for the 115 timeline.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Anything else on that?
I try to echo this every time we mention shadows, but I think that one of the points of this thing that we've been doing for a little while is like to groom people to take over the role, right? But part of that is a level of ownership and leadership in that, right? So stepping into the role, feeling that you can take on certain items. So to anyone on the call listening who's a shadow, right? Like, feel comfortable asking your lead what you can be doing. Feel comfortable to take things off of the plate. Feel comfortable in attending the meetings and giving updates, right? That is, I think, one of the in terms of like how the sausage is made when we're building the release team for the next season, right? Or cycle, like that's one of the things we're looking at. Like, did the person show up? Are they active do they try to be active in SIG release? Do they like SIG release in general in the release team, asking what they can do to help? I've seen several shadows for this cycle really like step up without any interaction, just like, hey, what can I work on? Or start picking up help wanted issue. Like, that's the kind of thing that we want to see. Like, that's what signals to us that like you're ready to take the role, right? So and then in terms of the documentation, I every time we mention the handbooks, I say like they're living documents, right? You should feel comfortable, again, questioning the things that are written down in the handbook, helping us tweak the process, right? It's not something that we, as the SIG chairs or as the release team leads or as the emeritus advisors are like writing policy from on high, right? This is a team activity. We want to make sure that like the stuff that we write down works for everyone, right? So be aware of that. Like, this is all of our thing to be a part of and fix together. So.
Josh, I know you'd sent out a survey as well for the shadows as like an exit survey. I don't know if you've had a chance to, or if you need any help like synthesizing some of those results, but I wonder if we can use that survey to get an idea of level of engagement from shadows, or at least their perceived level of engagement.
That was the idea, yeah. Unfortunately, of course, the deadline for that survey was immediately before Shanghai, and so I have not been able to go through the results for that.
Okay, let me know if you need any help doing that, since I think I have access to see it as well.
Cool.
Noted that down as action. Or what were you saying?
Yeah. There were some interesting results on that. Like, I haven't come through the whole thing, but.
Cool. All right. So next one up, Castro Joe. Are you here?
George is on vacation.
Okay. All right. Well,
good man.
Yeah, a lot of people are on vacation this week. So I'll read this one. Comms team synced with CNCF PR turnover now should be much smoother in 1.16. Handbook updates necessary for this to make the roles more explicit. So someone know or want to talk about this?
So comms is basically, so the tricky thing that we've had with comms is that, part of it is reputation, right? being able to deliver updates about the community. Those updates usually come from people who are trusted, and that has historically been CNCF, right? So what we have been trying to do over the last few cycles is make sure that people are enabled to do the things that the comm role would have to do without CNCF interaction, right? So over the last 2 cycles, I think we've gotten to the point where we're CNCF lists, at least on the release team. I think we still communicate quite frequently with them to actually push the button on blog updates, setting webinar timelines, and 5 days of Kate's blog series, and so on and so forth, and gathering the people for those. But Taylor's on the call too, so I will stop yapping again.
No, that's 100% what it is. It's just hard to understand what the context is because there's so many things in flight and things that are changing. Code Freeze does help that, and I know that George at one point in time was trying to get ahead of some of the blog posts and wrote out one that and ended up not flying. But I was like, that's fine, even if you did that. Looking at glass half full, we can still use that, just not within this release. It'll happen later, so we can start to do things like that for sure. In terms of deliverables, but that is definitely a +1 in terms of trying to find how do we know what's going on at any given point in time, and then align once we're ready to dig in and say this is exactly what's going to be shipped.
Yeah, so I think that part of this is there needs to be a level of consistency across the team, right? In like the people who attend, the people who understand like the mechanisms that we do to make comms happen in Kubernetes. So with the PM hat on, that's a plan as a sub-project of SIG PM, right? To have like a consistent comms body for Kubernetes, as opposed to so like being able to synthesize these themes ahead of time, right? Like having a pipeline of blog posts, right? So instead of 5 days of Kate's, it's like 30 days of Kate's, right? But we're not actually going to do that. But as an example, right? Just having more consistency around the process. I think that having non-CNCF people are is advantageous, so that we feel like that it's owned truly by the community. But there will be, I have already started speaking to CNCFers and former CNCFers about the communication subproject. So stay tuned for that, because they will be involved as well. So.
Cool.
Yep.
All right. Anything else on this one? Okay. So next is Tim, and I believe he's not here, so I'll read this one. SIG scalability probably will have the ability to simply revert commits on master, and probably also on the release branch, although they don't currently monitor much. See mail thread feature request, blah, blah. Sent to a mix of steering, Kubernetes, bunch of email groups. Yeah. Anyone want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so I think Josh and I can tag team this one. So I forgot who initially sent out the thread, but I'm the one who CC'd like all of those lists on it, because there were a few things going on, right? There's one part of it that that SIG scalability has within their charter. Right. So this is a document that has told you what SIG scalability plans to do, or what SIG scalability has the capacity and governance to do within the project. And one of those things is to be able to pull the trigger on removing code that affects the consistency of any branch. Right. This is a power that they have, like, it has been decreed in their charter and signed off by steering, but they have not had the power to do that, and they still don't, right? So they're not. So for you to be able to do that, you need to be in a top level approvers, and a top level approver in like the owner's file, for Kubernetes, right? So I believe right now none of them are. So there are a few things at play, right? Initially, I interpreted this to mean, hey, well, maybe you need more reviewers and approvers, right? And then try to turn it into a, hey, well, it would be really cool if we just buffed the amount of reviewers and approvers on the top level anyway, right? But there is also a different problem, that is the fact that, as mentioned in this thread, we're so we have defined release blocking criteria. I think that people working in test infra and CI signal over the last few cycles, as well as Aaron, doing some like Herculean efforts to actually enforce that stuff within test infra, make sure that SIG mailing updates and alerts were sent out and all that stuff within the config. So like we're getting to a place where people should know about the things that are failing. If they're looking at their dashboards, if they're responding to the emails, is a different story, right? So I think that we have some of the mechanisms in place to support this. What it comes down to is also a process change for the SIG, right? If you are going to say that your job can block a release, or that you have the power to pull things out of a release of master of a release branch, then you need to be present and active in monitoring these things, right? If you claim that and you don't show up, I don't think you should have the power. So
yeah, well, and it's not. And by the way, let me stress this: it has not been that SIG scalability isn't involved, but they are under-resourced, and so as a result, they're often in a position where they can't respond. And I'm having that argument going on in release criteria, et cetera, because because I don't, we're going back and forth with this because I don't feel like Wojek is understanding what anyone else is saying about the problems. Like, I don't think he really understands the idea of the test criteria levels. I think that we did have a problem that we weren't paying enough attention to master informant, which is what's come out of this discussion. That things on master informing were allowed to stay read, which they can, which is why they're informing, but they were allowed to stay read without us really understanding why they were read, which is not how it's supposed to work. Like, the idea of stuff on informing is some of those tests are flaky, so some of those tests will be read for no good reason. But we need to know when they're read for no good reason as opposed to when they're read for a good reason. And I was not following along CI signal when this was happening. I'm only dealing with the aftermath, because the aftermath is Wojek saying that we have to change the blocking test criteria, which I'm arguing with, but now it means that I actually need to get informing criteria. Do we have anybody from the CI signal team here?
I'm a shadow of this current release.
Yeah. Do you mind? Do we have time for him to do a recap of what happened there? Because I was not involved from the CI signal standpoint.
Oh no, I'm a shadow of the current release, not of the previous.
The current one, not of 115. Got it. Okay.
No.
yeah, I don't think we have anyone from CI signal on.
Okay.
But the the TLDR is essentially we had a few jobs that were read for forever, basically, and we did not it got to the point towards the end of the release cycle where we're like, hey, these things are still bad, like what do we do? Like, do we do something about it?
Yeah.
Who do we check in with, right? And and communication wise, again, as Josh said, there are some they're both under-resourced and also difficult to reach, not their fault, right? They weird time zones. Well, not weird for them. Trying to be diplomatic in what I say, but like no, they're on, you know, our release cycles tend to skew towards U.S. time zones, right? Specifically Pacific, and you know, and they're, I think, Central Eastern primarily, or maybe even further off.
Yeah,
Right?
no, I think they're like CST +1 or +2.
Yeah. So, you know, so attending some of these meetings you know, is not feasible, right, for them. And, you know, there's also the consideration around the stuff that they own. They're all long running high cost jobs, right? Are primarily all long running high cost jobs. That's kind of like the goal of the SIG, right? So what becomes really difficult is like, how do we communicate with people who are off, you know, who are off the usual time zones, get the signal in time, and know how to, you know, and know how to move forward there, right? If they identify a regression in a long running job or something, you know, then they have to determine, is it a flake, right? Is it a flake? Is it actually a regression? How long is it going to take for me to deliver this fix? How long is it going to take for me to test this fix, have it run green for a few times, right? And then, you know, by the time that has happened, you've lost maybe at least 2 days, right? Because some of these tests are running like every 4 hours, some of them.
One of the tests only runs once a week.
Hours. Yeah, so there you go, right? Right. So, you know, and then, you know, also hearing that, I hope that with the like global release calendar that we've put out for this cycle, and for every cycle, that people will be more aware of the you know, of the deadlines for certain events, like when we're actually cutting a release, because it was a little disappointing to hear that, like, when we were asking, like, hey, we have to look about doing this release very soon, and, you know, they were under the impression that they had an extra week. So, you know, so it's I think it's a better communication thing on all parts. You know, I had mentioned to Wojciech that you know, I think he or someone merged a test infra change to move one or a few of the jobs into master blocking. So part of that discussion is happening right now. I essentially said, like, listen, if you are going to move something into our dashboard, like, you need our approval for it, right? So then, you know, that's part of the discussion, but it's also like, if we need to tweak the criteria, then sure, like, let's meet and talk about how to do that. But you know, I think that some of what we have in place is the right stuff. If there are places where we can be more lenient, maybe we look into that. But like, the signal right now is like, just looking at the dashboards today, like, I know a bunch of crazy stuff happened today, but like, just looking at the signal today, it's not great across our dashboards, right? So, so I think that
we had a couple of things that went red as soon as we got the merges after 116 branched.
Yeah.
And are still red now. So it's going to be fun for the new CS Signal team.
So is it like documented somewhere why things are a certain color, or why they failed? Is there any information? I don't have much context into this, so I'm just kind of curious.
You have to go into, there's a whole bunch of UI stuff around the tests where you have to delve into what failed.
Got it.
And you know, we are talking about distributed computing, so often the answer of what failed is fairly complicated.
Yeah. And is there like so say this situation comes up again where something's release blocking, is there like a good way to notify, like, SIG release, or is it just?
Yes. So, so part of that work that Aaron did to better define the release blocking jobs, also involved enforcing certain configs, right, within test infra. And part of that is adding email addresses to alert on failures, right? So for the release team, I took a look at it, and most of the things that I think that are release team related are sending alerts to Kubernetes release team at googlegroups.com, right? The stuff that is specifically release cutting related, so like, can we install the debs? Can we check for this thing? Like, are the tests on Kubernetes release running okay? Stuff like that. Those send to, right now they send to Kubernetes release managers at googlegroups.com, right?
Cool.
So having the release engineering team handle that specifically, and having the release team, people who are involved in CI signal, receive the alerts that are related to the span of the release, right? So, you know, the ask here is that as we move into the 116 cycle, that CI signal is incredibly vigilant. People on the mailing list, even, you don't need to be on CI signal to do this for the shadows on the call listening. But, you know, if you see something fail, like, because the failure will come through, right? And, you know, I think, you know, for anyone who has done SRE, DevOpsy type operations-y work in the past, you know, there are some things that you see and you're like, oh my God, that's broken. Like, I have to stop what I'm doing and fix this immediately, right? And then there are the other things that you're like, well, that failure comes in at least 10 times a week. So I know that if I grab this on Tuesday, then I'll be fine, right? You know, so we have to make sure that we're not treating these alerts in the latter category. We're not like getting so used to seeing them that we don't action on them, right? So the hope is that people are vigilant in assessing those alerts, because the ones that come into the SIG release mailing lists, release team and release managers are ones that we need to concern ourselves with. They're ones that can potentially block the release. So.
Got it. So basically, it's just like being hyper aware and trying not to be desensitized to all the notifications if you're on CI signal. That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, overall there's the whole better feedback loop between release and scalability. Like, because this is, I mean, we're all clever people. This is something we can figure out. We just need to sit down in a room and figure out how to do it. So.
Yep. Great. So I know there's a kind of a lot on this topic. This is actually the last one that we have for what will we do differently. Besides that, we have some parking lot items, but I figured open it up. If there's any other thoughts, comments about 115, other things that maybe we didn't have enough time to discuss in the previous meeting. And then I don't know if there's nothing else, if we ended early or there's other things we talked about, but yeah, I figured it'd open up first, so. Doesn't sound like there's anything. Okay, there's a chat thing. Shout out to Steven for successfully being able to say specifically. Nice. All right. So do we generally end the meeting if there's nothing else?
Let's break into, I think we can, I think we have time to look at the parking lot. I think we have time to maybe chat about some of the action items, and
Okay.
I'm just checking if there are any. So there is one item on the SIG release agenda, but the item is also about SIG scalability and release interactions. So I think that we've ground that into the ground, pounded that into, I don't know, whatever. I'm gonna stop with the wordplay. So yeah, let's chat about some of the parking lot stuff.
Cool. So the first one we have up is quarterly too fast to release Kubernetes. So I know that there's some side discussion, even when I was at KubeCon, this was brought up, looking into an LTS model. But yeah, I think we were talking about it pretty early on in the retro last time. I don't remember the specific item, but yeah, anyone else have more thoughts on that?
This one came up around some of the comments about the dates being difficult, being right after KubeCon, and I think it was Christoph who had mentioned the it felt weird that we were bound by like a desire to be quarterly in our releases if it meant like moving the project too fast for features to keep up, or for like reviewers to keep up reviewing things so they could land in the release.
Yep. Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah, so what are some alternatives? I mean, there's the LTS conversation, which has its own set of challenges that would arise, but yeah. What are others thinking?
Well, I think mostly that the SIGs which complain about this perennially should do a better job scaling their reviewers and approvers. I cannot personally understand the assertion that a quarterly release schedule is too quick, especially when you look at other projects of similar scope or import that are able to release a factor of 2 to 4 times more quickly. I just think that we're just not doing our particularly good job scaling review and approval out of the SIGs. And I don't want to put back pressure on the release cadence because that seems to only force more things in at the last minute. I mean, every time we move the release, that things just keep they just flow in. I don't imagine there is a length of time we could find that would not cause the same failure modes.
Speaking as somebody who worked on a project that had year release cadence, I can guarantee you that it won't help things.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Caleb and Josh. I think that there is a point where we have to say, like, where's the line, right? Where's the line between ensuring that people can release the things that they want to on, in a quote unquote timely fashion, and while still ensuring that it's high quality, while still being fair to, like, listen, when we put together the release team, we're putting 30 to 40 people in a room, right, every week, right, to run this for a quarter, right? Outside of tooling and reviewers and approvers and blah 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 blah, like, what I try to consider the most is, especially like having been on the release team, enjoying being around the release team when they gather, is this is a volunteer effort, right? This is a volunteer effort of people every cycle. Like, how do you plan to put a program in place to make that happen more frequently or less frequently, right? Given what we already have today, right? Do we run a release team for 6 months? I don't think that that's something that's feasible, right? Intending to entirely be fair to the release team, one of the questions becomes like, okay, well, where is the line? How do we establish boundaries around the release team to protect these people, to protect their time, right? So, one of the things is, like, we frequently get the oh, hey, enhancements freeze or features freeze or whatever you want to call it. We want to push that can we get a few extra days? Like, no, you can't. Like that, no. Like, we set a date. You knew about the date. We have published the date, right? Adhere to the date, right? Because that allows us to know what you plan to release, right? That gives us time to prepare themes for the release, instead of what we do every cycle, scramble at the end of the cycle, have release notes and communications pour through release notes and try to, like, decipher what the theme of the release is, instead of having a SIG say, hey, these are the KEPs that we delivered, right? These are the KEPs that we've merged as implementable. These are the things that we plan to work on in this cycle. Feel free to develop your themes based on that stuff. If things drop, then they drop. But guess what? Once enhancements freeze locks, then we should have an idea of what's going on for the cycle, right? And then you take code freeze or code slush or code thaw and all that stuff, right? Can we push this thing a day? Oh, this thing is happening. We have to push it, can we do it a week later or something like that? Like, no, you can't, right? again, the date was set, right? The second you push that out, that means you take 30 to 40 people's time out of the equation and say like, yes, you will be waiting on this thing longer, right? And I don't think that's fair to the release team. So I care about the release team first and foremost. I think that having deadlines in place is a good thing. I think that until we get to the point where we are actively meeting the standards or that we've written down at least, and hitting those deadlines and putting things in place to protect people in all SIGs, like we shouldn't even be talking about what the release timeline looks like, what the release cadence is, right? Like we're not there yet. We have dashboards that are full of red marks right now. Like we're not even close.
Yeah, I would agree with the sentiment though that having a date, a timeline, it helps incentivize things to get done. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't. But yeah.
I mean, there's also the whole, even so I put out a poll on Twitter just because I was curious. I was like, hey, we cut the RC for Kubernetes 115. Who even knows we had RCs? Who knew we had betas? Who knew we had alphas? And people were like, right? So like if there was an opportunity for people to consume some of this stuff sooner, right? And I think there is an opportunity. We just need to like put the tooling in place to allow that, right? So that's something that Tim and myself and Hannes and Caleb, like we're trying to wrangle that effort to make sure that like people can consume this stuff sooner, right? I think that I think that having like what's the point of an alpha, a beta, an RC, like if people aren't using these things, right? Like let's just cut the release, right? If people. Mm-hmm.
That's part of it. The other part of it is that we need to change the project so the attitude and the reality is tests are passing all the time unless something's seriously wrong.
Yep.
Because the fact is, if we were pushing a weekly alpha right now, you couldn't install it half the time because it would be broken.
Yeah.
Well, I actually don't know if that's a claim we can make because the test infra is broken half of those times.
Oh, we're spilling tea on this call.
Networking is hard. It turns out the electrons aren't where you want them to be.
Oh boy.
I'm going to quote you on that.
So another one of the conversations that was on Twitter is like talking about LTS, right? And I was like, we're having this conversation. I was like, we have an entire working group on it, right? But I think that the people who most often request this or scream at the cloud at us are not the people who are involved in the project, right? So like if you are interested in making an LTS happen, come to the meetings, show up, write the tools, fix CI signal, fix test infra, go crazy, right? But like this is, again, it's a volunteer army, right? So the people who are here are the people I respect because they're doing the job, right? And like we have companies for LTS, like their entire company is built around support policies and building staffing engineering and product and support people to make that happen as a product, right? We are a project, right?
Yeah.
So that's something to consider as well. Like we, again, have to figure out what our line is and draw it. Say, we're not doing this.
Cool.
Yeah, I would just to tack on quickly here. I think the other side is you could probably attribute a lot of the success of Kubernetes to the 3-month release timeframe. So the fact that we are getting code in so quickly and getting it out for people to use so quickly, nobody ever kind of bothers to talk about that as being why the project is so successful. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's somebody said it in jest, really, to say, hey, I'm not going to do these reviews in time. Why is it like this? but really the root of the problem is there's not enough people doing reviews. If you space the thing out to be a year, there's going to be more reviews, and you're going to come down to the last week anyway.
Yeah.
So it's probably actually easier on them right now than it would be if we said, hey, we're going to show up a week before, and a release is a year's worth of changes, and you've got to review them the week before Christmas or the week before New Year. They're going to say the same thing. Well, why is the release every year? Why can't it be every 2 years?
I can say that at the current scale, that if the releases were a year, most of the commercial products would stop. They would cease to exist.
Totally.
Given the current level of angst of the people responsible for operating Kubernetes and qualifying Kubernetes the project into the commercial product. There's just no way.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're all in consensus here that quarterly is good, and we should keep it that way. And
yeah, and go and show up at the LTS working group. I think they will live parallel lives, but I don't think there's any consensus we can make about changing the release schedule.
Yeah, the support overhead would be too much, I think, for an open source project, and like I only see LTS, helping the business needs of like a smaller subset. So, but anyway,
I think at the point that we have one enhancement per release,
yeah,
as a current cadence, it may be worth considering, because then you would typically have 4 a year. But at 46, cutting them down to 26 per quarter, if that's your run rate, you got to cut often.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that having the opportunity to cut quarterly with a different set of people who get to question the process, question the tooling that's in place, like makes it stronger every cycle. I think like I've seen, so I've been since 111, 110 or something like that, right? And people on this call who have been doing it much longer, right? Having the opportunity to just like be around the release team as it gets better and better, and like everything that we do, like release notes come out, like we've gotten rid of an entire role, we've built this thing, we've done that, like all of the things that get improved as a result of being able to do this so often, or having to do this so often, is huge. I think that being able to iterate over this process and improve improve it is part of the game.
Yeah, for sure. I think actually the original comment came up more in relation to the was with the KubeCon schedule, and I think someone was on the call last time who had said that like that
we fix it.
Yeah, they're gonna fix it. Yeah, so it doesn't happen again. So that's a good thing. But we have 5 minutes left. We kind of already talked a lot about the SIG scalability, and I know there'll be another meeting perhaps on this. But the last parking lot item that I'll bring up is discuss RCs as release blockers. So I guess it's kind of related, but yeah, I forget in what context this came up too. I'm trying to look, but someone wants to kick this off.
Yeah, I don't know who put this up, actually. I kind of wish I did.
I mean, it's possible I wrote it and didn't have as much context, and I was just writing it down. But
I'm wondering if this plays into the like, what does it mean to be alpha? What does it mean to be beta? What does it mean to be an RC? Like, if the RC is expected to be of a certain quality, then can we say that at RC level we're close to being able to cut? Like, we should be able to say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, I don't know what the specific context is for this. We do want to make it easier for people to consume in general, right? They should be able to, there are a lot of, former Kubernetes companies that I've worked at, hint, hint, wearing the shirt, have said that, when we develop when we bring a feature into our product, we won't bring the feature in until it's beta, right? We refuse to bring in alpha features, right? Maybe we'll play around with them on our local or test clusters or something like that.
That's honestly how it's supposed to work, right? Because the idea of an alpha feature is not only, you might change it, you might decide to cancel it entirely. I haven't done overall stats, but based on deprecation notices I've read, I think we kill off a third of our alpha features before they ever reach beta.
Nice. That's awesome. But my question there is who decides that, right? Who's the populace that are actually playing with this alpha, right? If we're saying that, I can guarantee you that this was company policy, right? That, they said we're not doing it, right? So if the people who are trusted to be service providers for Kubernetes are not doing it, then who is doing it, right? Who is playing with the alpha feature, right? And then you extend that further to when people, I often hear when we cut a .0, people are like, okay, well, when's 15.1 coming out? When's 1.15.1 coming out? Right? They don't want to touch the .0, right? It's a thing like, I don't want to be the first person who touches this. I prefer to wait for the bug fixes, right? So we have to push, the point at which you get to touch it to earlier, right? You should be able in some shape or form to consume an RC. Like, personal opinion though, so.
Is there any way that we could get more insight into who, besides the poll that you had posted, like who is using this?
Yeah, SIG PM hat on. We can we can do a survey or something about that.
Yeah.
But from the poll, I was actually surprised at the amount of responses for follower account or whatever. But there are about 100 people who responded, and 55% of them said they had no idea these things existed. Right. So it's not just a usage thing that we're tracking. We're also maybe there's a lack of communication around these things.
There's a lack of findability.
Yeah.
Like, try going in blind. Try to go to Kubernetes.io and starting from there, figure out how you download a beta.
That's a great test case though. Like, how many clicks does it take to get to a point where you can understand how to download?
Clicks nothing. How many questions do you have to ask on Slack or Stack Overflow before you find the so I'm going to think that's the opposite. I mean, my personal experience has been that the people who test alpha features are the people who were involved in developing those features, which then obviously leads to some myopia problems in terms of discovering the issues with the features.
Yeah. For sure.
And I can say for sure, if you're a person who is expecting to consume debs or RPMs for some beta version of Kubernetes, right? The nightlies or the unstable channels, like, we don't have that. You wouldn't even be able to do it today, right? So it would be a matter of finding the tarball, and again, Josh is absolutely right. It's a findability thing, right?
Yeah.
If you're not willing to go spelunking on the stuff, you won't find it.
Well, I can do a test because I've never done it before, so I can do a test and see how long it takes me and let you guys know.
Famous last word.
But anyway, we're at time now, so any final thoughts before we close out the meeting? All right. Thanks everyone for joining in. I'm gonna try to clean up some of the actions I took because I just kind of jotted down names and handles, so I'll try to put proper names to things. But yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for letting me facilitate. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much, Christine, for facilitating.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, Christine.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks everyone. See ya.